This is the Answer Your Unique Calling podcast. This is a podcast for change catalysts, those that believe we can change the world and that the way things are isn't the way they have to be. Through this podcast, I share tools, tips, and inspiring stories for breaking through limitations, creating meaningful change, and embracing and trusting in your deepest truth. I'm Julian Crosson-Hill, certified spiritual life coach, human design specialist, and founder of Priest of Inanna. I help spiritually minded professionals discover and embrace a life of possibility, freedom, meaning, and impact. Welcome, and thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to this episode of Answer Your Unique Calling. Today I want to talk about work, and particularly I want to talk about knowing when it's time to leave your job. And I'm not just talking about knowing when it's time to leave your job as a spiritual entrepreneur. I'm also talking about people who are working in their career as part of their spiritual calling, or maybe they're thinking of switching careers because their calling is calling them in a different direction, or they just are feeling stuck and limited in their current role. And I've worked with some clients who have had some career issues and needed to make a change and help them through that transition and through deciding when it was time to go and what to look for in its place. And so I want to talk about a few aspects of that. And as a manifesting generator, I like to respond to things. And so one of the things that I'm responding to is there was an article recently in the Harvard Business Review talking about 5 reasons that you should leave your job even during a downturn. And I think that these were good reasons. But rather than just kind of go through what they were talking about, I'm going to put my own spin on this and talk about actually 6 reasons that it might be time to leave your job and look for another job or not. Okay, so the first reason to leave your job, regardless of whether it's a downturn or whatever's going on, is a toxic working environment. Listen, you do not have to put up with abuse at your job. You do not have to put up with a toxic work environment. Toxic work cultures are a sign of weak leadership. If you are working in a toxic environment, you owe it to yourself to go find something else. And I think sometimes people think that they have to put up with it because it's their work, or they think that they don't have a choice, or they think that this is just how bosses are, or this is normal. And it's not normal for you to feel stressed out, for the environment to be toxic, to feel like you're constantly being ridiculed or micromanaged or controlled or manipulated at your job. That's not normal, and it's not acceptable. And if you're experiencing any of those things, if you're just dreading going to work because you feel like your boss is going to tear you down, or you're being micromanaged so badly, or you can't take time off for things like going to a doctor's appointment or taking care of a sick child, then you owe it to yourself to look for something else, because that's not normal and it's not really acceptable. Our job, we spend a lot of time at our jobs, and we spend a good part of our life at our jobs, but our job shouldn't own us. And it should come second to things like our family and our well-being. And if it is getting to the point where it's interfering with those things, then it's really time to look for something else. Okay, moving on. It's time to leave your job if your values are being violated. So the Harvard Business Review article talked about this a little bit, but I've talked about this before, so I'm just going to say what I've always said. Your deepest spiritual values, you should look at them, particularly when it comes to your work, less as values that you hold and more as non-negotiables. If your work is out of alignment and out of integrity with your personal values, it's time to move on and find something else. Nobody wants to work at a job that makes them feel slimy or dirty or like they've really violated their personal, deeply held values. And I've had lots of experience with this, with leaving roles because of things that violated my values. I worked for a company that did a lot of printing of user-generated content, and they had some pretty weak moderation rules, and they were printing some pretty questionable things. And everybody in the company knew that they were printing some pretty questionable things. And management refused to take any action on it because it was making them money. And that was so against my personal values that I left that role. And I encourage everyone to take a look at their personal values and does their job support those values, or is their job violating those values? And if it's violating those values, again, really try to look at those values as non-negotiables. Those are the things that are non-negotiable. If your job doesn't align with them, then that job isn't for you and you go find something else. And again, I think that unless you have some really like strict values that are unusual, I'm even having trouble thinking of what that might be. So I don't know, maybe a vegan who's really a hardcore vegan and doesn't want anyone in the company to eat meat or something. I don't know. That seems really extreme. I don't think that any values that you have are going to be something that's so unusual that a job can't accommodate them or should be violating them. There shouldn't be any reason for your job to put you in situations where you have those questionable value judgments around, am I going to do this work or am I going to go look for another job? So if that's happening to you, then you might want to start to look for another role. The third one, and this is a really big one, is if your skills aren't being used or developed. If you have skills that you're not using and you'd really like to, or there's not opportunities for you to develop those skills further, then that might be a sign that it's time to move on. And I'll tell you, I had a client who was in this situation. She had worked at a company for a very long time, had been a loyal employee, and she had gone on and earned both a bachelor's and a master's degree during her time with the company in a field related to what the company did, but not related to the direct line of work that she was currently doing in the company. So she kept applying for other roles with this company where she could use the skills that she had achieved and gotten and develop these skills that she had gotten in studying for these degrees that she got. And they kept turning her down for these other roles or telling her that she was too important in the role she was in, which is an absolute shitty reason for someone to not move you to a role where you can develop your skills. If you are so valuable in your role that they can't give you something more challenging to do or promote you, then that company is broken. They've got a culture that is broken, and it's time to hit the road because they're not really appreciating you in the way that you should be appreciated. But back to my client. So my client was just really, she felt very loyal to this company and she didn't really want to leave. And in our coaching sessions, we just really talked about how frustrated she was by this. And it just finally came down to, does this company appreciate you? Does this company value you? Because if they value you, they will value that you've gotten these additional skills. They will value your desire to use those skills to benefit the company. And they will do right by you by helping you develop. And if they're not doing that, then it may be time to move on. And so we did an exercise where we really talked about I had her make a list of 10 things that if she did that in a job, it would just really make her day. Like the 10 things that she just really enjoyed doing and 10 skills she really wanted to use, just really getting clear on what kind of job did she want to do. And then we narrowed it down to 3, the top 3 things that if her job involved these 3 things, these 3 skills or these 3 tasks, then that would be the job for her. And then we also talked about what other industries might use these skills that she had and might do these types of tasks, and then kind of came up with a plan for her to begin to look. And she did find another role that was a better fit. Now, ultimately, that role did not work out for her. She went to this other role, and the job that they told her it was going to be wasn't what she was actually doing. She was doing a lot of busy work and not doing what they had said she was going to be doing when she got hired. So the job was sort of misrepresented in the interviewing process. And she ended up leaving and going back to the company that she had just left in a role that actually was a better fit for her and her new skills. But that's kind of the sad thing about it, is that she had to leave and go somewhere else and then come back for them to finally acknowledge and recognize those skills that she had. And so if your skills aren't being used and not being developed, then it's definitely time to start looking. And you could do an exercise like the one I did with my client to get really clear on what kind of role or what kind of job do you want to find. Another one is, if you're not being given opportunities to be visible, to really grow in your career, especially if you want to become a leader or you feel called to leadership, you need to be visible. And if you are in a role where you're really not visible, and the company isn't giving you opportunities in the form of projects or adding you to certain meetings or getting your input or doing things to allow you to be visible so that you can be seen for future promotions into leadership and things like that, then I would say that that's time to leave your job and to start to move on. And remember, all of these come from the Harvard Business Review as well. These aren't just out of my own head, although this last one, when I get to it, I did add because they only had 5. Okay, finally, feeling low energy. If you are so burned out and so drained, if your job has burnt you out, then it's definitely time to move on from that and consider maybe taking lesser responsibility in your next job. Maybe look for a job that has less demands or is only part-time or something where you can recover from that burnout. I worked as a CTO at a very small company, and I was putting in some 16-hour days, and I was just so tired and so burnt out. And I took some time off. I took a day off to go on a trip with my husband, and my phone was ringing constantly the whole time we were on this trip from work. And that's just, for me, that's when I went, okay, this job is burning me out. And they don't know how to even respect my downtime when I've taken vacation and I'm out of office. And so that, to me, was a sign to move on, because it was clear that the work culture didn't respect my personal time outside of work. And if you're in that situation and feeling burned out around it, then it's definitely time to make that shift. Okay, so the 6th reason that it's time to leave your job, and this is the one that I think applies to spiritual entrepreneurs. So if you're a spiritual entrepreneur and you've been asking yourself, when's the right time to leave my job? Here it is. It's time to leave your job when you have a spiritual business and your business has grown to the point where you are losing money by working in your job. And what I mean by that is, when your business grows to a certain point, then it becomes an area where you have to look at the time that I'm spending in my job. If I were spending that time in my business, growing my business instead, would I be making more money in my business than I would working in the job? I hope that makes sense. But it's basically really looking at the time you're spending at the job and what you're getting out of that job, and then looking at, if that time were in my business instead, how much more would my business make, and would it outweigh the job? So basically, when your business has grown to the point that your business is starved for your time, then it's time to quit the job and be full-time in your spiritual business. So that's my 6 reasons based off of Harvard Business Review's article on the 5 reasons to leave your job even in a downturn. And whether you're just a spiritual professional who's looking to make a change in their career or just unhappy with their job, or whether you're a spiritual entrepreneur trying to decide if it's time to leave your job, I hope that this helped make it a little clearer for you. And I hope that the exercise that I suggested that I did with my client might help you get clear on what kind of job to look for if you are making that change. And hopefully this got you a little clarity. And I think probably for most people, it confirmed what you already knew. Because let's face it, I think a lot of times when we're thinking about leaving a job, we already know it's time to go. You know, if our values are being violated or we're burned out or our skills aren't being recognized or any of these things, we already know, but we sometimes put off actually making that jump because it's a little uncomfortable. And so hopefully this podcast just validated and confirmed for you that, yeah, it's time. Bright blessings. This has been the Answer Your Unique Calling podcast with spiritual life coach Julian Crosson-Hill. Help others discover this podcast by leaving a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Did this episode speak to you? Is there something you'd like to hear more about? Have a suggestion for a guest you'd like to hear? DM me on social media or use the contact page on my website to let me know. www.priestofannana.com. That's Priest of Annana, INANNA.com. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Priest of Annana, and don't forget to check out the Soul Expansion Soundboard live every other Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn.